Facebook's really continuing to build on that, encouraging more on-property commerce to actually be transacted. And that's so they can continue attributing the results of those transactions to ads on their platform, which is going to become more difficult to do across domains in future.
Hey gang, it's Thursday, May 6th. Debbie, Nicole, and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an e-marketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by two principal analysts. We have with us our principal who covers everything social media. It's Deborah Aho-Williamson.
Hello, Marcus.
Hello there, Debbie. We're also joined by our principal analyst who covers everything digital advertising. It's Nicole Perrin.
Hello.
Hey, Nicole. Also the host of The Ad Platform, another one of our shows here at Behind the Numbers. So I get to talk to Nicole much because she went and got on her own show and left me behind. But she's back for another episode. Today's fact: kids ask 300 questions a day. 2013 UK study from online retailer littlewoods.com observed young children and recorded the questions they asked the adults around them. The children tended to turn to their mothers for answers, and these mums could end up answering, on average, nearly 300 questions per day. Okay, this says ended up answering. A kid can ask as much as they want, but I'm not responding to 300 questions a day.
I was going to say, we need Debbie to fact check that for us. Debbie, does that sound right to you?
It depends on the child, but for one of my daughters, absolutely, 100%. We actually called her the why girl because she kept asking why. And she would embarrass me in the grocery store sometimes because she would look at people's carts and she'd say, why she have that? Why she that? Why she get that? And I'd be like, oh my God, do not comment on that person who just bought 4 bottles of tequila.
Does she need 4 bottles, Mum? She got a nickname. All right. So 300 questions a day, that translates to 1 every 2.5 minutes, the study found. The mums reported the hardest questions to answer included things like, why is water wet? It's a great question. And what are shadows made of?
That's a good one.
The impossible question. So there are 2 kinds of people in the world, okay? There are people who heard me say 300 questions a day and said, wow, that's insane. These people don't have kids. And then there are the people with children who heard 300 questions a day and said, that's way too low. It's 1 a second, sometimes 2 per second, sometimes when they're asleep. Anyway, today's real topic, Facebook. So today, folks, we were talking about Facebook, which I thought we were talking about yesterday. Panicked. We were talking about Snapchat, but it was okay because I'd prepped for the right thing. Today is Facebook. We're talking about how they did in Q1. We'll talk about the earnings, of course. We'll talk about revenue and user growth and some other things as well. We start with users, some of the highlights. 1.88 billion daily active users. They cover monthly and daily as well, but for this episode, I'm mostly focused on daily because we can compare daily to some of the other social platforms, and it is a more true measurement of engagement, once a day versus once a month. So 1.88 billion daily active users. They added 33 million. Facebook has added around 36 million on average each of the last 12 quarters. So it's in keeping, on average, obviously some ups and downs. By region, North America was flat at 195 million. Has been since Q1 of 2020. Europe only added 1 million to reach 309. It was at 305 a year ago, so that's barely moved. Growth came from APAC, adding 16 million, and rest of world adding 15 million. Debbie, I'll start with you. What jumped out to you about how Facebook did user-wise in Q1?
Yeah, I think the takeaway I have is that the flattening that you described in the US and Canada and essentially in Europe is to be expected. And they did talk about this on the earnings call after the numbers came out, that COVID, obviously, we've talked about this a lot, COVID caused a lot of increase in engagement, and that is starting to slide away. It's happening less so, I think, for Facebook than it might be for other platforms like Twitter. But I do think it's still pretty remarkable that even in the US, where it's been flat, the percentage of MAU, or monthly active users, that daily active users represent is 75%, which is actually, to me, pretty remarkable.
Mm-hmm. I was going to mention that really surprises me. I mean, not in the sense that I didn't know that that's generally what it's been, but every quarter I see it, it still kind of surprises me.
So we talk about Facebook as a utility. Speaking to Eric Hagstrom, who's one of our senior forecasting analysts, he was noting that TikTok, time spent by TikTok users using TikTok, was starting to challenge and threaten Facebook's time spent with, so Facebook users spending time on Facebook. What do you make of TikTok's ascendance and whether it's going to be able to compete on a time spent basis with a behemoth like Facebook?
Well, I think there's a bit of apples and oranges because the primary audience for Facebook is not identical to the primary audience of TikTok. So we're not exactly seeing people, take time away from Facebook and move it to TikTok. That said, and we've talked about this before on the podcast too, TikTok is an incredibly engaging platform with huge amounts of time spent among their users. I mean, like almost in hours per day for some demographics, according to the company. And that's incredible. But I don't think we're necessarily seeing it challenge Facebook directly.
Okay.
Yeah, I suspect that, as we've talked about before, TikTok is sort of more about entertainment, right? It's obviously video oriented. And of course, people go to Facebook for entertainment, but not necessarily primarily to watch video. And, Debbie, what we've seen in our US time spent with media estimates that we've recently updated is that time spent with traditional television continues to go down, and time spent with digital video is going up not only on CTV, but time spent with smartphones is also going up. So I think it's actually, more probable that we see TikTok taking some TV time as opposed to some Facebook time.
I think that's really valid. As a matter of fact, just to throw us an interesting tidbit on there, TikTok is starting to become available as an app for smart TVs. So you can actually watch your TikTok videos on your large screen.
Huh. Interesting. And I wonder, I guess, at what point do TVs start to integrate cameras? I guess you could throw a camera on top, but at one point does it just become the biggest screen, the most interactive screen in terms of being able to do all the dances and stuff and capture them on the TV? A few other numbers that jumped out to me from Facebook's user numbers, these are just insane. I think it's just worth reiterating just how dominant Facebook is. Facebook added another 100 million people to their daily family active people number. That's the number of people who use a Facebook something, whether that's Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, or the Blue app, regular Facebook. So now that's at 2.7 billion. They added 100 million. 100 million, as I often note, compared to populations, that's an Egypt, which is the 14th largest country in the world. For Americans, 100 million people would be Texas, California, Florida, and New York combined, America's 4 largest states. Another point here, Facebook's monthly daily family active people number, so the same number but by month, is 3.45 billion. That's 44% of people on the planet Earth use a Facebook app, one of those 4 I just mentioned, and once a month. It's worth noting only 55% of people in the world have the internet. So put another way, 4 out of 5 internet users on the planet use a Facebook something app. If you have the internet, you use Facebook something.
And you haven't even tossed, China out of the equation since it's not available in China.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Take out an extra 1.6 billion folks and the penetration just skyrockets even further. Just the Blue app, Facebook monthly active users, to quickly give them a note, the monthly people are approaching the 3 billion mark. Just Facebook Blue app should get there by summer. Let's move to the revenue picture. Revenue highlights, $25 billion made in the quarter, up 46% on the $17 billion they made last Q1. Half of that money, $12 billion, comes from North America, up 42% year on year in Q1. Europe, APAC, and rest of world all saw growth of over 50% year on year in Q1. Debbie, revenue-wise, what jumps out to you?
Well, Mark Zuckerberg said it best. He always says it the same way. And as he starts his earnings calls, he says, "We had another strong quarter." Literally, you can go back almost every transcript, and he says some version of that statement. And I could only say yes. they've had another strong quarter. And it's less surprising, I think, now than it was, a year ago, earlier in the pandemic, not 6 months ago, when we weren't sure still what the ultimate impact of the pandemic was going to be on these digital platforms. But, as Nicole can talk about, because she follows Amazon, Google, all of these digital companies, Facebook included, have had incredible success in ad revenue growth during the pandemic. It's
literally incredible.
Yes, record-breaking in some cases.
Yeah, let's talk about how well Facebook has done amongst those other digital ad giants. So in the US digital ad share race, Facebook gained 1.5 in share, just share, 2019 to 2020. Doesn't sound like a lot. That's a LinkedIn. That's a LinkedIn's worth of share. Or put another way, it's a Twitter and a Spotify combined worth of share Facebook added 2019 to 2020. This year, Facebook will hold on to 25.4% of the digital ad pie, ticking up to 26% in the next 2 years. Nicole, what's driving this and how does that sit with the rest of the digital ad giants?
Yeah, well, so, Facebook's success in the past year has been driven by a lot of the same factors that it has been over the past decade or so. We've talked about them on the podcast throughout the pandemic. And it's the fact that they have really effective performance ad products that are appealing to, they started out with very strong appeal to advertisers that were doing online conversions, like people trying to get you to install an app, whether that's a game app or some other type of app, branching out from there into other types of content subscriptions and also e-commerce, all kinds of direct-to-consumer e-commerce that, again, the conversion is occurring directly online. And that part of the business especially expanded over the course of the past year because, as we all know, more and more consumer retail spending has been happening on digital channels. And they're just, continuing to capitalize on essentially the digital transformation that's accelerated in our society because of COVID. They talk a lot about small businesses, and it's true that some very large share of advertisers on Facebook are small businesses. Those people prior to Facebook and Google, they didn't really have performance ad products that were accessible to them. They do now. It's helped them build much stronger online businesses. And that was key to those that survived over the course of the past year, right? And, Facebook's really continuing to build on that, encouraging more on-property commerce to actually be transacted. And that's so they can continue attributing the results of those transactions to ads on their platform, which is going to become more difficult to do across domains in future.
Apple's iOS 14.5 update, which Facebook hasn't been too excited about, won't be reflected in the social network's Q1 numbers, as it just started rolling out this week, or recently. Apple's changes mean apps will have to ask mobile users if they have their permission to track them. During Facebook's Q4 2020 earnings, Facebook CFO David Werner said that the company was expecting Apple's changes to have an quote-unquote increasing impact throughout the year as users upgrade to iOS 14.5. Folks, what do we expect that impact to be? Tough question.
Yeah, well, so, we don't have a specific estimate of, here's how much revenue we think that Facebook will lose, or, more properly, how much growth Facebook will not have because of these changes. But of course, we do have estimates for ad revenues at Facebook this year. And we estimate that here in the US, their growth will accelerate to 26.6% increase over last year. And, based on the very strong performance they just reported for Q1, there's a decent chance that we'll be revising that upward. Although we'll know more, in a few months when they report Q2, and we do start to see in there some of the effects of the iOS 14.5 related headwinds. I think, we've seen estimates out there kind of ranging from 1 or 2% of Facebook ad revenues to as high as 7%. I think that we thought sort of the lower end of that probably made the most sense. But I do think that there is a meaningful extent to which some advertisers who were using Facebook to try to get you to install mobile apps won't be doing that anymore, won't be spending as much on that as they were in the past. But as I was just mentioning, Facebook has lots of other types of advertisers, and many of those may continue to find the platform just as effective or almost as effective and will continue to bid similar amounts. One of the things that we haven't talked about as far as their ad revenue growth in Q1, they attributed a lot of that to rising prices. What's happening is advertiser demand is increasing faster than impressions. Impressions on Facebook are still going up, but not super fast. So I think that, considering prices are going up right now because of that overall supply and demand picture, it seems like, there's a really good chance prices will continue to hold up even with these issues.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that. Facebook said this on the earnings call. I mean, commerce-related, retail-related advertising is their number one vertical. So think back to the beginning of the pandemic when a lot of advertisers pulled out of platforms like Facebook and ad prices dropped precipitously in Q1, Q2. Some people thought, oh my gosh, that, death knell for Facebook is going to be terrible. But what ended up happening was many other advertisers just immediately jumped in and said, yeah, we're going to buy those ads. And prices ended up going back up by the end of the year. So to the extent that mobile app advertisers pull out of Facebook, certainly commerce advertisers could come in. And I think that that is a definite possibility. The other thing I'll just throw out there is that I think, just like Mark Zuckerberg says on almost every call, we had another strong quarter. David Wayner also says something to the effect of, we expect advertising headwinds in the coming quarters. And these headwinds never seem to materialize for Facebook, although he always talks about them.
Right.
Well, we just don't get to see the counterfactual, Debbie. You have no idea how big they would be without all of these headwinds, right?
But I guess so. But to look at it on its face, there does not appear to be very strong headwinds that the company has been able to, either that or they're just able to stand up against them. They're that much stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. Strong headwinds if you're in a jet don't really mean much, but if you're on a bicycle, can mean everything. Debbie, with regards to Apple's iOS 14.5 update, you noted in a recent article, in February 2021 research by MMA Global, an apps flyer suggesting that just 13% of American smartphone owners said they would be likely to allow social media and messaging apps to track their personal data. I thought that was an interesting point. Yeah, we shall see what people say and do. Very, very different. A few other highlights I wanted to throw out there quickly before we wrap up the first half of the show. Average revenue per user was up $9 from $7, up to $9 from $7 last Q1. However, just US and Canada average revenue per user, $48, up from $34 last Q1. Europe's average revenue per user was up from $10 to $15 in Q1. Year on year, APAC and rest of world ticked up a tiny bit. And then net income doubled what they hauled in last Q1 at nearly $10 billion, nearly as good as their Q4 number. That wraps up the first half of the show. Time now for the halftime report, where we summarize the key takeaways from a lead story in a handful of seconds before in other news in the second half of the show. We'll start with Debbie, then move straight to Nicole. Key takeaways, Debbie, from the first half.
So the takeaway is Facebook had a very good quarter, just like many digital publishers did. But when it comes to users, although the monthly active user gains are pretty notable, we did see some flatness in the US, Canada, and Europe in daily active users. And that, I think, is to be expected. We're all tired of COVID and we're hoping to get outside more. And so engagement with social is starting to trend down.
I think, big takeaway is incredibly strong advertising growth, but they are starting to lap a period where they were a little bit weak in 2020. They already had weakness in March of 2020, so keep that in mind. But again, Q2 2020 was their weakest period, so don't be surprised if you see accelerated growth reported next quarter. And again, I would just reiterate that a big reason for the revenue increase goes to increasing prices, and that's just a really important dynamic to keep your eye on when you're thinking about what advertisers are going to do on Facebook.
Excellent points. That's all we've got time for the lead story. It's time now for In Other News. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, VTEX. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast, flexible, and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. So you can go to VTEX, that's VTEX.com/eMarketer to learn more. Right, folks, we are back. Today in other news, how many people are using Facebook dating? Unredacted filings show that Facebook knowingly overestimated its potential reach, and Facebook Reality Labs are working on a wristband. Story 1. Ashley Carman of The Verge notes that, quote, Facebook's own ads reveal not many people are using Facebook dating, close quote. The short history of Facebook dating is tested in Colombia in 2018, came to the States in September 2019, hasn't been talked about since, except last October when it expanded to Europe, and Facebook said it had made 1.5 billion matches. Tinder, for reference, boasts 37 times as many. The Verge noted that Facebook's in-house ads advertise the number of users it has in specific regions. In the country's largest city, New York, Facebook advertised nearly 300,000 singles as currently dating in the city in the week that the Verge article was written. Up slightly from the previous few weeks, Ms. Carman works out that census data estimates that 2019 suggests that nearly 4 million unmarried people call New York City home, meaning Facebook dating has about 7% of the city's singles on it. It's apples to oranges, but Match Group says the average number of paying subscribers across its apps in Q1 reached 11 million, split about equally between North America and rest of world, let alone the number of folks using its app for free, or its apps for free. Debbie, your thoughts on where Facebook dating is at?
Well, I think my first takeaway is, bravo to the author of the article to use Facebook's own advertising to create a story. I mean, it was pretty awesome. But also, I think one statistic that I think I would like to have seen is the percentage of people who are in Facebook's demographic who are dating in New York City, because it certainly trends older, 35 and up, I would imagine. So there's that comparison. But either way, I'm not surprised that Facebook dating is not performing as well as people might have expected. It was always sort of a weird outlier to me from when they first announced it. And the only redeeming thing that I think the story does point out is that Facebook is, able to gather data about people from those who do decide to fill out a dating profile. They're able to gather that data and potentially add it to the profile that they already have built up about that person. And it's first party data that Facebook owns. So it does provide some benefit there. But as far as dating goes, I mean, yeah, there's definitely bigger fish in the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Nicole?
I think my only comment would be that not all unmarried people are single. There's a lot of unmarried people who are not in the market for a dating app of any kind. So that 7% penetration figure in New York just might be a little low.
It's an important definitional distinction. Yep. I don't know, the 300,000, I was like, oh, that's high.
I mean, that sounds like a lot of people. You've got a lot of choices at least, right?
Considering I've never heard it ever come up, ever, since they announced it a few years ago. In April, we did note that The Verge had reported on a new experimental Facebook app called Sparked, which sets users up on 4-minute video speed dates. See if that makes any noise. Story 2. Back in February, Financial Times reported that a newly unredacted filing from a 2018 lawsuit in California claims that Facebook knowingly overestimated its potential reach metric for advertisers, largely by failing to correct for fake and duplicate accounts, and that senior management were well aware of the issue but refused to act when a product manager proposed a fix to correct the numbers because it would produce a significant, quote unquote, impact on revenue. Facebook says, quote, potential reach is a helpful campaign planning tool advertisers are never billed on. It's an estimate that we make clear how it's calculated in our ads interface and help center, close quote. However, Addie Robertson of The Verge notes that the suit cites an internal Facebook statement calling potential reach, quote, arguably the single most important number in our ads creation interfaces, since advertisers relied on it to design ad strategies and budgets, close quote. Nicole, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on this largely unreported story and how advertisers view Facebook reach metrics?
Well, advertisers have long noted that Facebook is a black box. It has lots of kind of opaque metrics and measurements. And, as a walled garden doesn't just let you see all of its data and have just any third party that you want to monitor or audit it. So, there's always been an element of trust involved in working with Facebook and platforms like Facebook. And that's a big part of why advertisers have called for them to allow more third parties to audit stuff like this. But, it always kind of pays to take these metrics with at least a grain of salt. As Facebook has said, they are estimates. And so just, be careful and buyer beware, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Debbie?
Yeah, I think harking back to the first story about Facebook dating, if Facebook told me there were 300,000 people available for me to date in New York City, and in reality there were only 200,000 or whatever, I would be unhappy. And so I can kind of understand why advertisers would not love this. I think it's also important to note that our figures, our estimates for Facebook users do attempt to discount for fake, duplicate, non-human, and spam users. And we have been for a while. So at least to us, the idea that the numbers that Facebook puts out are not actually representative of the number of people on Facebook, that's not new.
Mm-hmm. Story 3. How do you interact with the internet? Likely an Apple, Samsung, or Google-made smartphone, of course. If not, then it's through your Apple, HP, Dell, Lenovo, or other brand of computer. Well, in a few years' time, you might be interacting with the internet through a Facebook-made device. The social media giant is, like a lot of folks, banking on the next generation of computing being some kind of device that you wear. Facebook Reality Labs are working on a wristband, Intelligent Click, to pair with an augmented reality headset like Facebook Oculus, so that your small finger motions that obviously come from your brain can let you click on menu items hanging in the air around you. Tanya Jonker, who demoed the product for reporters in March, said the goal is to give users exactly the right interaction at exactly the right time. For example, when you step into the kitchen, you might see a recipe, writes Scott Rosenberg of Axios. So think Minority Report's gesture-based interface or some kind of mixed reality situation. Debbie, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on a Facebook wristband?
Yeah, you know what? Minority Report is exactly where I was going. And any of those other movies where you see someone just, standing in front of something and using their hands to just maneuver things around in space. Clearly that's the vision here. And I think, Facebook has had development labs of this sort for some time. And it's always been made it very clear. The company has always made it very clear that these are extremely futuristic. Like, we're not going to see these things in the next few years. I remember a demo from Facebook's F8 developer conference several years ago where they talked about being able to type with your mind and hear with your skin. I think that was in 2017. And so it's been 4 years, and I don't think we're definitely not seeing either of those things yet. So fun to read about and fun to think about, certainly. And I'm imagining we'll eventually see something like this come, if not from Facebook, from another company in the future, but not at any time soon.
Yeah, you're spot on. What's so surprising to me is, given how futuristic a lot of this technology is, Facebook, The Verge was saying Facebook has nearly 10,000 employees in its division working on augmented reality and virtual reality devices, according to a report by The Information, based on internal organizational data. So thousands of people working on this stuff, which won't be here for a very long time. Nicole, what do you think?
Well, we've talked before, Marcus, about how various AR and VR devices can very easily identify you as a unique individual based on how you move your body in the world and stuff like that. And this Axios article talks about the idea that, the more context your device knows, the more data that it has on you, and et cetera, that, people don't necessarily trust Facebook with data or worry about privacy leaks or worry about, some of the commercial applications. I also think, honestly, that the idea of having some predictive technology feed me what I want in all of these real world life situations. For me personally, I don't think that's what I want. I think there's, at least to some extent, a current of sort of backlash against kind of being fed things, based on your past behaviors and kind of keeping you in a loop of similar activities and similar interests and similar types of content. And maybe some people have a little bit more hunger for kind of serendipity and more direct experience of the world.
Mm-hmm. In the meantime, we'll wait for the Facebook wristband. In the meantime, the information reported that Facebook is building an Android-based smartwatch with its own Facebook OS, its own Facebook operating system for hardware devices coming soon, apparently. The smartwatch would have messaging, health, and fitness features, writes Nick Stat of The Verge, joining Facebook's Oculus VR headsets and Portal video chat devices as part of Facebook's growing hardware ecosystem. Facebook's also working on branded Ray-Ban smart glasses for later this year. So we've got time for. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to Debbie.
Well, thank you, Marcus.
And thank you, Nicole.
Thanks.
And thank you to everyone who took time to listen in. We'll see you guys tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Weekly Listen, the marketer podcast made possible by VTEX. What are shadows made of? Anyway, we don't have time for that.